In January of 1985, we had the first of what was called a gong show. This was a concept that Michael Eisner brought over to Disney from Paramount.
It was an opportunity for all of us to get together and to sort of open the doors up and hear everything and anything.
Everyone was supposed to come up with 5 new ideas for animated features. And I went out and looked for ideas, and I went into a bookstore and I read The Little Mermaid and got very excited about it and wondered why it had never been done before, and then realized when I got to the end that it was a very sad story where the mermaid dies at the end and loses her prince. But I came up with an idea of a way to make it end in a happier way, wrote up a 2-page treatment, and then when we reconvened 2 weeks later, I pitched The Little Mermaid. It actually got gonged.
It was gonged because they were in development at that point on a sequel to Splash, and they thought it would be too close, so they just said, nah, we're doing the sequel to Splash, forget it.
But the next day, I got a call from Jeffrey Katzenberg, who said he had read the treatment and actually thought it had potential, and it was put in development.
It was outstanding, and it was better in the writing than it was in the telling. The question was, what do you do with it next? In the world in which I come from, go hire a great screenwriter.
So I guess he was checking out other writers. People were sending in drafts and everything, and Ron Clements finally came to him and said, I think we can do a good job on this.
John Musker and I, we had worked together quite a bit. We were both writers as well as storymen, so it seemed natural to ask him if he would want to collaborate on a script.
Ron and John really fought passionately for an opportunity to write it, and you know, as animators and as animation directors, it never occurred to me that they were screenwriters.
The idea of doing a fairy tale appealed to me because it was certainly part of the Disney tradition, but there hadn't been one in 30 years. So it was doing something in a tradition and yet trying to find a new approach to it that really hadn't been done before.
They wrote a stunning screenplay. I mean, just to this day, I remember it as being one of the best of anything I've ever had.
Peter Schneider was also a major influence in the studio at that time because he fostered this whole idea of communication.
It was a collective process. There's no one person can take ownership. That's what's so beautiful about animation. It's everybody.
So while we were working on this script, we heard that Howard Ashman had actually been approached by the studio and was actually interested in working on The Little Mermaid.
I grew up on Pinocchio and Peter Pan, and the idea of doing one of those is like there's all these library books on the shelf. There's Snow White, and there's Sleeping Beauty, and there's Cinderella, there's Peter Pan, there's Pinocchio. And to try to make something that fits comfortably on the shelf with those, I mean, that's like, what a difficult thing to do, but what a great thing to try to do.
There you see her, sitting there across the way.
We were adapting Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale in the style of Disney. And so in a sense we were pastiching Disney. In order to pastiche Disney, we naturally brought in styles from the outside. And calypso and reggae were clearly a new style to bring in.
The seaweed is always greener in somebody else's lake. You dream about going up there, but that is a big mistake.
I think that was one of Howard's greatest gifts, was making stylistic marriages.
Don't say a word, and she won't say a word until you kiss the girl.
Howard and Alan actually moved to Los Angeles, and they had offices right there in the animation building.
They would be off in a room, sitting at the piano, making up songs.
This music is Alan Menken composing for The Little Mermaid, but we shouldn't have.
So when they're working on Under the Sea, you hear dun 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 dun.
I just remember thinking, where does this great music come from, these great songs? We haven't had stuff like this in ages.
Well, that first time I heard Under the Sea, I had that in my car, just wearing it out.
Under the sea, under the sea. Nobody beat us, fry us, and eat us in fricassee.
He loved playing with words, obvious. It's obvious from his lyrics.
Snoot played the flute, the cop played the harp.
The place played the bass, and he sounded sharp.
The bass played the brass, the chub played the tub.
The child was rocking out.
The flute is the Duke of Soul. Yeah. The rake, he can play the lings on the strings.
The child rocking out, the blackfish, he sings, the smelt and the sprat, they know where it's at. And oh, that blowfish blow!
There's something about Under the Sea that, just to me, that's such a Howard song.
What do they got? A lot of sand. We got a hot das Häschenbein.
Every time I heard these songs, they just sort of so effortlessly rolled off, you know, your tongue.
I could think, these are great songs. I have to go work on that movie.
There was electricity in the air. I mean, there was real genius at work, and people knew it.
The music was gorgeous. The arrangements were incredibly good. It just took everything to a new level.
One of the great things with Howard and Alan's music, I think, is the wittiness of it. It isn't dumbed down for any audience.
Sacre bleu! What is this? How on earth could I miss such a sweet little succulent crab?
I think we wanted to make songs that would tell the story, songs that would really move the story forward, really push the plot along and keep things driving ahead.
They approached it like a Broadway musical. It is something totally different. The characters actually run out of words, can't express themselves anymore, and it has to come out in song.
You get to a certain point where the crab has to convince the mermaid not to go up above the water and change her life, so he has to sing Under the Sea. And she has to sing Part of Your World because she wants to go up to dry land so badly.
When she's saying to Flounder, you know, I've got all these treasures around, I've got this and I've got this, and I say, look at this stuff. I mean, it just comes right out of the dialogue that she has. And then she just begins this monologue that happens to be put to music.
I want to be where the people are. I want to see them dancing, walking around on those, what do you call them? Oh, feet.
The choices that you make in doing an animated picture aren't necessarily about trying to do something new. It wasn't so much okay, we're going to do a new heroine.
I approached her with the idea that she was a real teenager with genuine teenage angst about, you know, I'm still a little girl, but I want to be a big girl.
I'm 16 years old. I'm not a child.
Don't you take that tone of voice with me, young lady.
The choice for red hair was definitely a very conscious, deliberate choice. For me, what I remember was simply the fact that we had just come out with a mermaid picture in Splash, and you had a blonde Daryl Hannah. So right away it was just like, well, we got to do something different.
I remember a major argument over Ariel's hair. People would walk into the room with totally different images in their heads. Jeffrey thought he was going to see Daryl Hannah, maybe.
You know, he's like, guys, everybody knows mermaids are blonde, okay? And we're like, do they know that? Do we know that?
The choice of a red hair for Ariel works way better than blonde because, for one thing, you've got these lovely complements. You've got the red on top and the green tail. So you've got two complements, which gives you an energy.
I knew it!
Also, you want to take her into a dark place and her hair gets darker. A dark shade of red is really much more easy to accomplish than to take yellow and make a dark yellow. Ugh.
All characters go through this where you start out with something that's close and it kind of evolves. But I think Ursula probably, more than any character, went through a huge amount of reiterations before ending up with the final design.
In the original development drawings, she was played as a lionfish or a scorpionfish, where she had all these spikes and spines. Then it was Matt O'Callahan, who was storyboarding on the movie, who really came up with the idea of the witch as an octopus, and that really launched it in a different direction that we thought actually made sense.
We tried fat versions, we tried skinny versions, and the fat ones always looked more interesting.
After having written the script, we went into storyboards. We put the film on reels, which is shooting the storyboard drawings and filming them.
There was no animation, but we had the dialogue, we had the voices, we had story sketches to illustrate all the story points.
It was right around the end of 1987, early 1988, that we showed this assemblage of the whole movie to Jeffrey Katzenberg. Here's our movie, here are the songs plugged in, here's the story, here's the characters. What do you think?
And his reaction was, I love the script, I love the songs, I don't love this. Why don't I love this?
You cannot see what you're looking at. You have to see what it's going to become.
You know, Ron and John had a lot more experience with it than anybody else did. And they could look at a pencil test and know that that pratfall would work just fine when it was in color. But Jeffrey had no experience with that.
He had no patience. I mean, they were so used to everything going fast, 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 and animation is just like snails.
If you asked 100 people that know me to list all the, those things about me, not one of them would have the word patience, ever. And here's the irony. The thing I end up finding myself doing, devoted to, in love with, is making something that takes infinite patience.
Certainly the stress level, I think, kind of took off at that point, because suddenly this charm project that could do no wrong was possibly in trouble.
When we ran into some story trouble partway through the movie, where certain story points weren't firing off, Howard actually stepped in and rewrote some of those specific scenes.
We knew that Howard was a director and Howard was a writer, and he was really good in all those areas.
I never knew Howard to just do one thing on any production. He had to get more involved.
He did 3 key scenes that really had a huge effect on the movie. I think they're 3 of the nicest scenes in the movie, and they were all written by Howard.
The first one was when she was on the beach and the crab was in her hands.
You could go home with all the normal fish and just be miserable for the rest of your life.
And that's the point where we actually see the change in Sebastian. He's changed from like, okay, I thought this was a mistake, but from this point, I'm on your side.
All right. I'll try to help you find that prince.
Then Howard wrote the nighttime scene where he was really trying to coach her.
You gotta bat your eyes like this. You gotta pucker up your lips like this.
And then, the most crucial of all perhaps, he rewrote our last scene with the king watching Ariel, where he decides to give her legs.
Originally that scene didn't have dialogue. It was all done visually. I guess we thought, well, we can just put it over with the looks and the expressions. But Howard felt that we shouldn't be afraid of really having the words spoken.
Then I guess there's just one problem left.
And what's that, Your Majesty?
How much I'm going to miss her.
That solidified what the movie, in essence, is all about, which is the king realizing that he can't control his daughter and that she has to follow her heart.
Before we were going to take the movie out to a theater and preview it, we did sort of a step down from that preview where we just invited a bunch of school kids to our building in the theater at Flower Street.
This story is true and deeply humiliating, but we'll tell it.
I storyboarded part of your world and had probably animated half the song.
I wanna see 'em dancing.
And so we rolled the movie, and they did squirm during part of your world.
A child dropped their popcorn box, or the container of popcorn, and became restless with needing to clean that up. And Jeffrey took that as a sign.
I came out of that and just said, don't think this is working.
He said, maybe we should lose the song.
Howard's in horror, we're in horror. Glenn Keane, who just rough animated, is in horror.
To me, it was the last thing I thought possible.
I was, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do?
I was, what? So that's it? It's like all that work is gone?
We made all our arguments and we didn't win. Howard made his arguments even and didn't win. And the person who finally actually talked Jeffrey into at least giving it another chance was Glenn Keane.
I called Jeffrey, just because of some hyperactive kid sitting in front of you, you can't take it. Glenn, look, I understand you of all people are going to feel this the most, but it's not just because of that little kid there. It's boring. It's like.
So fortunately, Glenn, through his petitioning Jeffrey Katzenberg, got enough of a reprieve from the governor, a stay of execution, such that we could preview it with the song, and we at least got to animate the song.
Up where they walk, up where they run.
I think it was probably out of the movie for about a minute or two, and back in, and can't imagine the movie without it, can you?
Wandering free, wish I could be part of that world.
We had this first preview at the AMC Burbank of the unfinished movie, and the numbers were through the roof.
Don't be scared.
Talk about a sigh of relief.
Kiss the girl.
Maureen Donnelly and I visited Jeffrey Katzenberg after one of these little preview screenings that we had.
He was incredibly gracious, saying how happy everybody was with the movie, that it was great, but to not be disappointed.
He said, you know, it's not going to do as well as Oliver did because that's a boys' movie, and it's the same way in live action. Guys' movies do better than women's movies. It's just the way it is. And I had never even thought of it as being a girls' movie. I just think if it's engaging, I would think it could transcend gender lines, and in fact it did.
And I remember actually getting into a discussion with one of the storymen where we talked about, is it possible for a Disney animated movie actually to, say, make $100 million?
It opened in November of '89. I forget what the opening weekend was, but it was good.
The usual arc, you open and then everything's downhill from that first weekend. But Mermaid just stayed.
It just kept playing and playing and playing and playing and playing and playing.
I don't think I was at all surprised that it did as well as it did. You know, I wish it was today and it was coming out now because it'd make $500 million. That's how good it was.
One of my great memories of the movie was the night of the Academy Awards when Little Mermaid won Best Song and Best Score.
Howard was very excited to win the Oscar. He loved it. It was fun. It was fun to be acclaimed.
And Mermaid was the one that just awakened people. They went, oh, wow, it's back. It was like this whispering, it's back.
You hope that what engaged you and moved you and excited you will move other people as well. And when it works at its best, that's what happens.
I remember one particular letter from a New Jersey state trooper who said he saw the movie and he was just in tears, and he had a relationship with his daughter that was estranged, and he called his daughter and they made up.
I love you, Daddy.
Little Mermaid is the foundation on which an entire renaissance was built.
It was about the time of Lion King that we started calling it a golden age. And that's a measure of how proud everybody was of their work.
Sometimes if you take out one element in a time frame, everything else collapses too. The Black Cauldron served its purpose. There was good work done in Oliver and Company and The Great Mouse Detective. But when Little Mermaid came along, it was the right film at the right time, and it really did turn everything around.
I don't know when, I don't know how, but I know something's starting right now. Watch and you'll see, someday I'll be part of your world.
My name is Einar Asgaard. I work as a curator at the Odense City Museum, the Hans Christian Andersen Museum, and right now we are sitting in the street next to the house where Hans Christian Andersen was born in 1805. When Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid, he felt quite proud because he had installed his own emotional view of the world into the story.
Hans Christian Andersen said that of all the stories he wrote, The Little Mermaid was the one that really moved him in the course of the writing. I think it was really emotional for him, probably because the life of the Little Mermaid in many ways related to his own life and his own experiences.
There's no doubt that Hans Christian Andersen saw a part of himself in the picture of The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid is a story of going from one level to another level. And that is actually the story of Hans Christian Andersen.
As we started developing the story for a Disney animated feature, I was really impressed with just how visual it was and how cinematic it was.
The imagery in it is so powerful and poetic, and Andersen, he seemed sort of like a filmmaker in the way he was describing the story, and it really made the story come alive.
We wondered why Disney had never pursued it before. It wasn't actually until months later that we found out that the story had been developed in the early 1940s by Walt Disney and his staff as a kind of a featurette.
Kai Nielsen the great illustrator of children's books, had done a whole version of the story in these little watercolors and charcoals. They had these drawings stored away in the archives from that version, and they were a great inspiration to us as we unearthed them and literally pinned them to storyboards and used them, particularly in the storm sequence, I'd say, as a point of visual reference.
One of the strongest themes, I think, of Andersen's story is this theme of yearning for a world that you are not a part of.
When Andersen was born, Odense was a small city. Hans Christian Andersen's parents were absolutely poor. But in Odense there was a theater, and Andersen, he had a longing to this theater and the theater life. When Hans Christian Andersen was 14 years old, he decided to leave Odense in order to get to Copenhagen and search for a career at the Royal Theatre there.
He aspired to be famous, to be successful, to be accepted, to be loved, all those things.
When Hans Christian Andersen published his first fairy tales, his old friend told him that fairy tales would make him immortal. This is the wish of the Little Mermaid.
In Andersen's version of The Little Mermaid, she had almost a dual motivation. She was intrigued by the human world and particularly by this prince, but also she aspired to have an immortal soul.
But in order to gain an immortal soul, she has to be loved by someone.
In our version, the immortal soul idea seemed less important.
It was a love at first sight story, so I think as Walt's version did, we also did, in that we focused her attention really on this prince. One of the big set pieces in the Andersen story is really this rescue of the prince. In the Andersen story, there is a convent on this sort of cliff above the beach, and there are girls from the convent that then come upon the prince, and that scares the mermaid. She dives off into the water, and one of the girls from the convent is the person that he really feels like is the one that saved his life. In the 1941 version, Kai Nielsen and the story guys at the time were really trying to stay closer to the Andersen story, and Walt's big note was like, we don't need to do Andersen literally. We need to adapt this and make it work for our medium. He thought it would be stronger if she's leaning over him and she's humming a song and he's just sort of groggily waking up.
And I could be part of your world.
He hears the song, he catches a slight glimpse of her. She was a mystery girl that he could only just remember this kind of haunting refrain that would play through the course of the film, and that was in Walt's notes. We hadn't seen those when we developed the story, but we actually went right along those same lines, that it was really the voice that sort of haunts him.
So it was as if Walt was looking over our shoulders while we were developing this, because it seemed like a lot of the things that he was thinking, we were thinking too.
Up where they walk, up where they run, up where they stay all day in the sun.
The singing voice is also a parallel between Hans Christian Andersen and The Little Mermaid, because Andersen had a very brilliant singing voice as a child. He became a pupil at the singing school to the Royal Theatre. Later on he began acting for the theatre, but after 3 years he was dismissed from service. He was too tall, too skinny, and his singing voice was changing while he was growing older.
What I want from you is your voice.
The Sea Witch was a character in the Andersen version, but she was a smaller part of the story. She does strike a bargain with the Little Mermaid, and the price is her voice, and she literally cuts off her tongue. In the 1941 version that Walt and his story people came up with, she, in her excitement about becoming human, rushed off to land without knowing the consequences of her deal with the witch, and it wasn't until she actually opened her mouth to speak to this prince that she discovered that her voice was the price she had paid. We wanted to keep the Andersen thing that she knew that she was giving up her voice, and we didn't want to have the bloodiness of actually seeing a tongue cut off, so we did sort of a magical version of all that.
Certainly one of the big themes in Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid is this idea of self-sacrifice and what you have to go through, what you have to give up for love. She has to give up so much that you really feel for her and what she's going through. In the Hans Christian Andersen version, even though she gets these beautiful legs, it's painful to walk on them. And I think this certainly relates to Hans Christian Andersen himself.
The pain of love that the Little Mermaid suffers was a pain that Andersen suffered throughout his life. When Hans Christian Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid, he was 32 years old, and he had 2 love experiences, but unhappy love experiences. Although Hans Christian Andersen climbed the social ladders and got his education, he was a sort of misfit in Copenhagen. His love was disregarded because Hans Christian Andersen was a full-time author and he was very poor. He did not belong to the elite of society. The same thing is going on in the fairy tale of the Little Mermaid. She cannot say to the prince what she feels. She had to be silenced with her love.
In the Hans Christian Andersen version of the story, when the voiceless mermaid washes up on land and she's found by the prince, she lives there in the palace for quite a long time. So even though she's well treated, she has to go through so much suffering as the prince tells her that you are so great and I like you so much. I really would love to marry someone just like you, but you're not the girl who saved my life and I must marry the girl who saved my life.
In the 1941 version, when she came to shore, she heard the bells in the church and she was led immediately to this wedding of the prince with this girl. The wedding is taking place and she's heartbroken and she sees the ship going off and she's seeing her dreams of her life with the prince going away. In our version, we wanted to have a ticking clock.
Before the sun sets on the 3rd day, you've got to get dear old Princey to fall in love with you.
So we had time to have them have a tour of the kingdom and get to know each other. And he could really be drawn to her over the course of those 3 days, and yet there was sort of a deadline involved.
And then we took the idea then to actually have the prince finally decide, forget this mystery girl. I really, really like this mute girl that I met on the beach. In terms of the other woman in these 3 versions of the story, in Andersen's version, there's kind of a prearranged marriage, and to his surprise, he discovers she is in fact this girl from the convent. So everything works out very happy for the prince, not so happy for the mermaid. She knows that at the next sunrise, this is going to bring about her death, and she's going to turn into sea foam.
In our version, then, we made this other maiden be the witch who had actually taken the mermaid's voice. So there's this horrible irony that, you know, he's not only getting married, but he's getting married to the person that we despise the most.
In the Disney version, in the 40s, he really felt it wasn't important who the prince was going to marry as long as it wasn't the mermaid, and that's the way they played it.
In the Hans Christian Andersen ending of the story, the Little Mermaid is turned into sea foam and she is whisked away by the daughters of the air.
So she dies, but because of the acts of love, she can gain immortal life. The success of the Little Mermaid is that she is gaining the immortal soul. And the tragedy of the Little Mermaid is, in fact, the tragedy of Hans Christian Andersen's life. Because in contrast to his splendid career as an author, there is this tragic life of a person who could not get the love and had to spend his life in loneliness.
The actual Disney version explored in the 40s was even sadder than the Andersen's version because she totally died and turned into sea foam and she was gone. Our version, in terms of the climax, is probably where we departed from Andersen the most radically. The Sea King finally realizing that his love for his daughter overpowers everything else, transforms her into a human so that she can marry her prince. There's still a price to be paid. The king has to give up his daughter, and Ariel has to give up her family. So there is a bittersweet aspect, and I think in that respect, hopefully it would be something that Hans Christian Andersen could relate to.